Well, starting off at number 10, the Shanghai tunnels in Portland, Oregon. Portland was one of the most dangerous ports in the United States during the early 19th century, and it was the epicenter of Shanghai, a form of human trafficking. It's crazy to think human trafficking still happens today, and tunnels are still the way to do it. According to the local lore, swindlers preyed upon unsuspected men in the local salons, which were often outfitted with trap doors that deposited the victims directly into a network of underground tunnels. These men were supposedly held captive, drugged, and eventually transported to the waterfront, where they were sold to ships as unpaid laborers, aka slaves. Some worked for several years before finding their way back home. The tunnels are said to be haunted by the aggrieved spirits of the captives who died in the dark recesses behind the city. Random fact: the practice of kidnapping men to work on ships came to be known as Shanghai because the ships that were sold to were often headed to East Asia. Number 9, Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The castle-like Eastern State Penitentiary took solitary confinement to whole new levels when it was built in 1829. Prisoners lived alone, exercised alone, and ate alone. When inmates were left in a cell, a guard would cover his head with a hood so he wouldn't be seen. The prison had to abandon its solitary confinement system due to overcrowding from 1913 until it was closed in 1970. Although the forms of punishment did not get any less severe. I mean, chaining an inmate's tongue to his wrists, that's just one example, a true story. The site's one of most haunted places in America right now. Well, it welcomes thousands of visitors every year, both for its museums and annual Terror Behind the Wall celebration, which features 6 haunted attractions within the prison walls for Halloween. I mean, when you talk about an attraction inside of a prison, no thanks. Well, it was reported paranormal happenings have included dismembered laughter, shadowy figures, and pacing of footsteps. Sorry, I thought I was hearing footsteps behind me right now. Okay, I'm pretty freaked out with this one, so let's move on to the next one. So next up, number 8, we have House of the Seven Gables, Salem, Massachusetts. Now, this house did not steal its name from the classic novel. In fact, it inspired the novel itself. Salem is known for its history of the famous witch trials, and that's where Sabrina Spellman lived, but it happens to be the birthplace of Nathaniel Hawthorne, who used this 17th century house as inspiration for his famous 1851 novel, The House of the Seven Gables. Aside from its beautiful yet spooky facade, the house is surrounded by paranormal activity and ghost sightings, all based on personal experiences of staff. Every October, the house offers spooky tours as well as weekly performances of 2 plays. The Legacy of the Hanging Judge and Spirit of the Gables. Would you guys see a play in a haunted town's haunted house? Coming in hot at number 7 on this list, the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. If you've read or seen The Shining, you know the feeling of this often snowbound hotel. It's the location Stephen King based his Overlook Hotel upon. It may not look like the film unless you watch the 1990s made-for-TV movie version, which, yeah, I don't think anyone has. I mean, just walking to your room can drain you. So one stiff drink might have you seeing ghosts, or a couple kids chanting, "Red rum, red rum." Number 6, we're bringing you Red Onion Saloon, Skagway, Alaska. Established in 1898 as a brothel for miners during the Klondike Gold Rush, Alaska's Red Onion Saloon, it had a feature that set it apart from other bordellos. It used dolls to help run its business, so always a good sign, right? Well, every day 10 dolls would be placed on the bar downstairs, each one representing one of the ladies working in the upstairs room. A customer would choose one of the dolls, at which point it would lay down on the bar to indicate that particular workers were occupied. When the customers came back downstairs, the doll would be returned to her sitting position to let other potential clients know that she was available. Well, fast forward to 2019, when the Red Onion Saloon still operates as a bar and restaurant, yet the dolls are still on display, and it offers tours of the upstairs rooms, which are preserved as sort of like a mixed-shaped brothel museum. As if these dolls weren't creepy enough, there were reports of Lydia, a former madame of a brothel haunting the site, complete with cold spots and lingering smells of perfume rafting through the walls. I mean, all creepiness aside, I'm more curious about how this place got named Red Onion. I mean, they could have came up with any other name. Well, let me know what you guys would call this in the comment section below. Give me a name. Alright, we're halfway on this list. Number 5, we got RMS Queen Mary in Long Beach, California. This retired ocean liner sailed the Atlantic Ocean from 1936 to 1967. During the first 3 years at sea, the Queen Mary carried Hollywood celebrities like Elizabeth Taylor. Her days as a luxurious ship were short-lived. In 1939, she was stripped of her amenities and began her second life as a Grey Ghost, a World War II troop ship. At the conclusion of the war, she was restored to her former glory and traversed the Atlantic for nearly 2 more decades. On Halloween 1967, the Queen Mary departed on her last cruise, eventually docking in Long Beach, California, her final resting place. The ship is reportedly haunted by the spirits of those who died aboard, such as the young sailor who was crushed to death by a door in the engine room and a crew member who was murdered in cabin B340. Number 4, Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast in Fall River. So this location came up on nearly every search on our quest to find this top 10 list for you guys. Well, you've likely heard of the children's rhyme Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave it to her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Well, you can not only visit the scene of that famous 1892 double homicide, you can also sleep at the Borden's home, eat their last meal, Johnny cakes of thick cornmeal pancakes and eggs, in case you're wondering, and spend the last nights in the bedroom where the bodies of Lizzie's stepmother Abigail was found. Someone who stayed there said, "I can attest, this home painstakingly furnished to look exactly as it did on the morning of the murders. Well, that will creep you right out." Better though, the 175-year-old property hosts up to 20 overnight guests, in which some of them, for some reason, it's a tradition when you go to this place, they will actually whip out a Ouija board. I mean, I'm not down for Ouija. That is a real life situation that can happen, and let alone whipping out a Ouija board in a haunted place. Finally, down to number 3 on this list, we have Crescent Hotel, Erica Springs, Arkansas. Since its construction in 1886, the Crescent Hotel has served several purposes: luxury resorts, conservatory for young women, junior college. But the strangest mark on its history came in 1937 when it got a new owner, Norman G. Baker. Baker was a millionaire inventor who decided to pose as a doctor despite having no medical training, and turned the hotel into a hospital that can cure cancer. Well, he was eventually found out and he was ran out of town, although reports say that his spirits found its way back to the site and found some otherworldly company too. The now operating Crescent Hotel is said to be haunted by at least 8 ghosts, ranging from a 5-year-old girl to a bearded man wearing Victorian clothing. 1 ghost is enough for me, never mind 8 of them, and children ghosts, I think those were the absolute scariest kind. And number 1, we have Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, Western West Virginia. This 4-botting asylum began construction in 1858 and opened to patients in 1864. The massive structure was designed by architect Richard Andrews to maximize sunlight and fresh air. It was believed that the building itself would serve as a healing environment. It was designed for 250 people housed and 2,400 patients in crowded conditions. I mean, that's a pretty big range, going from 250 to 2,400. Patients were physically restrained and often given inhumane treatments such as the electroshock therapy and lobotomies, which was very popular back in the day. After more than a century in operation, the facility was forced to close in 1994, which, when you think about it, wasn't too long ago, within the last 30 years, and it was due to the reforms in mental health and treatment and the deterioration of the building. Hundreds of patients died during the asylum tenure, and scores of guests and ghost hunters have claimed they're seeing shadowy figures roaming around the facility.
Starting us off at number 10 are satanic symbols. Back in 2013, a couple named Janine and AJ moved into a quaint and sweet little house in Springfield, Louisiana. They were so excited to get the house and were amazed at the cheap cheap price. But soon after they moved in, it quickly became apparent as to why the price may have been so low. Things started off small, as it usually does, with their radio turning on all by itself or seeing the lights flicker independently, but soon enough they overheard their son speaking to who he described as an imaginary friend late at night, and they heard a strange voice threaten to begin hurting Janine. Before long, Janine was being assaulted by the unseen presence, waking up to find bruises and scratches, and would often get pushed around by the demon in the middle of the day. She began noticing that the rosaries she hung were spinning in the house, plaster was falling from the ceiling and missing her by mere inches, and she began to seriously fear for her life. One day, her and her husband decided to leave out a tape recorder to see if they could get any proof of the demon occupying their house, and sure enough, when they went to check up on it the next day, they captured a growling sound and the demon saying, "She will die." But the last straw was when they moved a rug in one of the rooms, only to discover that the floor had been covered entirely in satanic symbols. This led them to believe that once upon a time the house had been used by a satanic cult that had likely brought the horrific demon that was taunting them into our world. Needless to say, they packed up everything and got the out of there. Next up at number 9 is Sarah Winchester's mansion. As the story goes, in 1881, Sarah lost her husband to tuberculosis, and in her grief sought out a spiritualist in hopes they could help her contact her husband to help her overcome this tragedy. But instead of getting the solace and closure she was looking for, she received an ominous warning that sent her off the deep end. You see, her late husband's family had created the notorious Winchester rifle that became known as the gun that won the West. What that meant was that thousands had died due to this creation of the gun, so when they reached her late husband in the beyond, he warned Sarah that all their lives' tragedies were a result of the blood money earned from the evil weapon. Next, he explained that spirits were coming after her with a vengeance and she needed to build a home for herself to protect against them. But there was one catch: she could never stop building. If she stopped construction, she would die. Sarah took this omen incredibly seriously and began construction on her property immediately, turning her house into a topsy-turvy maze-like mansion, believing it would confuse any spirits who tried to enter and torture her. There are staircases that lead to nowhere, trapdoors, skylights on the floor, doors that open to walls, and even a door that opens to a second-story drop. With all that, it's said that ghosts really did get trapped inside and now, unable to leave, get madder and madder with each passing day. Many have reported seeing apparitions, voices, and footsteps while visiting. Next up at number 8 is a demon mirror. It's not just homes that demons can allegedly occupy, but they're also a big fan of inanimate objects. In this case, a mirror. According to London roommates Joseph and Sotiris, they scored a free antique mirror from their landlord a few years ago. The friends were young and didn't have much money, so they were just happy to get a free piece of furniture. But after bringing it into their home, strange things started happening, and they soon discovered it had to be connected to the new mirror. The roommates began suffering intense and lucid nightmares and would wake up with brutal stabbing pains all over their body, along with scratch marks. Not only that, they would frequently wake up to find their entire house was practically turned upside down in a complete pigsty, almost as if they had been robbed. Soon enough, they were seeing shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their house and saw glimpses of darkness in the mirror, along with orbs of light appearing out of nowhere in the room. Eventually, they decided to get rid of the mirror and they landed on selling it on eBay with plenty of warning about what to expect. I have to say, I am worried for whoever bought it from them. If it were me, I would have just destroyed it. Next up at number 7 is a Ouija board. I don't know who decided to let Ouija boards become such an easily accessible item available to purchase at Walmart, because I don't think I have ever heard of it going well for anyone. One of these such stories is that of Tracy and Kieran Fry from South Wales. They became huge names in the British tabloids back in 2015 after they claimed that beginning on Halloween night, 3 incubus demons made their way into their home and began terrorizing them both physically and mentally every night for months. But they really got afraid after their son reported the demon visiting him, threatening to slit both Tracy and Kieran's throats in their sleep. And not long after that, they claimed to have witnessed the apparition in the light of day and even snapped a picture of the demon for the paper. The couple believed that the evil spirits managed to use their Ouija board as a vehicle to infest their home, which they had apparently used previously in an attempt to contact the dead. Eventually, the torture got so bad that they contacted a paranormal investigator as well as a vicar to try and rid the demons of their home, but allegedly only 2 of the entities were able to be squashed, and according to the couple, the demon never actually left and continues to haunt them to this day. Coming in at number 6 is Deanna Simpson. After years of being haunted by several demonic entities in her home, Deanna decided to reach out to reporters to share her story. Although the details have never been confirmed, Deanna claims that the origin of the demons in her home come from a series of gruesome deaths that occurred on the property, and she believes that the spirits are angry and unable to move on from their deaths. Eventually, things got so bad that in 2014, a film crew from Fox 43 arrived to see for themselves if the rumors were true, and what they saw changed their lives forever. As soon as they entered, they knew that Deanna had been telling the truth about the entities in her home. One of the cameramen, Nick Petrillo, said he felt burning all over his hands whenever he tried filming inside the house, and the only thing that made it go away was the holy water that Deanna poured over the area. While the crew was there, she went into more detail about her experience with the demons, explaining she believed it was multiple evil spirits haunting her, and that over the years they frequently tortured both her and her husband, physically and mentally, and she was beginning to lose hope about a better life. Deanna claims that she captured the shadowy figures on film, although this has never been confirmed. Still, the camera crew seemed to be quite on board with her experience. Coming in at number 5 is The Cage. During the witch trial era of Essex, this house was used as a prison for women accused of such sinful acts. During the 16th century, it housed 12 accused witches, one of which was the famous Ursula Kemp, who was tragically hanged for her so-called witchy ways. Whether that is all a coincidence or not is up for debate, but according to the 2004 owner, Vanessa Mitchell, it is a terrifying haunted home filled with deep-seated evil. The demons wasted no time introducing themselves to Vanessa. She claims that the first night in the house, she saw a shadowy figure in the corner and knew right away that something was very, very wrong. Shortly after, she began to feel harassed by the entity, as it would do things like push her when she was home alone, smack her hard enough to leave bruises, and even shoved Vanessa down the stairs. Not only that, she began seeing strange things. Blood stains started showing up on her floors all the time, and objects began launching themselves across the room. Whatever it was, it did not want her there. In an interview, she states that during her 3-year time living in the cage, she witnessed 4 ghosts, 2 men and 1 woman, as well as a horrifying goat demon, which she claims to have captured on camera. Thankfully, she got out alive, but the house remains a notorious spot in Essex, frequented by paranormal enthusiasts hoping to catch a glimpse of the evil entity that nearly killed Vanessa. Next up at number 4 is the Smurl House. Between the years of 1974 to 1989, the Smurl family was subjected to some incredibly terrifying hauntings in their Pennsylvania home. Over the 15 years they lived here, Jack and Janet Smurl, along with the rest of the family members, reported that their TV burst into flames, their toilets would flush themselves, and that various electronics would stop working for no reason at all. But it was at night that the family got truly terrified. They would hear the loud footsteps despite there never being an intruder, and a nauseating smell always filled the house, but only ever at night. Soon enough, things got even scarier. They began finding what appeared to be claw marks all over the bathroom, and then in 1985, a full-bodied apparition began haunting the halls and hovering over them while they were sleeping. The family named her Old Hag, and it seems that after a while the demon got bored of just watching the couple sleep, so it began harassing them, and according to Janet, would routinely commit SA on both her and her husband. That was the final straw for the couple, and so they decided to bring in a priest to exorcise the demon out, but even after 50 exorcisms, the entity refused to tighten its grip. So, fearing for their lives, the family finally moved out in 1989 and never looked back. Next Next up at number 3 is Latoya Ammons. When Latoya Ammons moved into her quaint home in Gary, Indiana in 2011, she had no clue what was in store for her and her family. According to Latoya, things got bad quickly. The first troubling phenomenon occurred when a huge swarm of large black flies started circling the family's screened-in porch and only seemed to be multiplying. These flies were relentless, even staying through the winter, and as soon as they arrived, so did the sounds of strange footsteps at night. Then one day Latoya saw a shadowy figure walk across her living room and she began to panic. Something evil was in her home. It all came to a head after Latoya witnessed her unconscious 12-year-old levitating above her bed at 2 a.m. So she contacted some clairvoyants to try and rid whatever evil spirit was living in the home. According to the paranormal experts, Latoya's home was haunted by an astonishing 200 demons and was indeed a very dangerous place for her and her family to be living. Latoya decided the best course of action was to undergo exorcisms to rid themselves of anything the demons could have placed on them and flee their home. All I can say is thank God they got out alive. Coming in at number 2 is the Sallie House. Built in the 19th century, this haunted Kansas home is named after the ghost that is believed to roam its halls. The haunted house came into light back in 1992 when owners Tony and Deborah Pickman came forward saying that they began experiencing very strange things in their home after the birth of their daughter. What was once a completely normal home was suddenly infested by a demonic entity, covering the couple in scratch marks, cuts, and bruises nearly every day, and anyone else who visited the house received the same treatment. Soon, things only got worse. They were seeing full apparitions of the demons, watching objects float around their house, and hearing strange demonic noises at all hours of the day. It got so bad they contacted investigators who attempted to reach the spirits and reason with them, but the investigators were similarly tortured by whatever it was that was in their home. Eventually they came to realize that Sally, the house's most active ghost, had died here when she was young from a botched appendectomy, and despite what they initially thought of her, she was not the demon herself. Instead, she had somehow become a magnet for dark entities to pass through, almost like a portal for demons to enter their house, and it was them who was making their lives a living hell. By 1994, they had enough and moved out of the horrible house, but have since maintained a website dedicated to their experience there. And last up in our number 1 spot today is Marie and Chris. Marie and Chris had a blended family, each with kids from previous marriages, and lived a very happy life. Until they decided to use a Ouija board to contact Chris's son from the dead. Quickly after beginning, they were contacted by an entity claiming to be Chris's son, but in fact, it was not his son. It was a demon masquerading as him. The demon called itself Frank and began detailing its desire to possess Julie, one of Mary's daughters who had cerebral palsy. This was enough for the couple to know that things were very wrong, and they quickly closed the board and ended the seance. But unbeknownst to them, they had opened a door they couldn't close. The family began being taunted by the entity Frank, and so Chris, thinking it would banish the spirit, decided to burn the Ouija board, but all it did was make Frank angrier and stronger. He began appearing in Mary's dreams, continuing to threaten the life of Julie, to the point where Mary was too afraid to even sleep, fearing it would only be the tortures of the demon all night. The family began seeing faces in the walls at night, waking up with scratches and bruises, and eventually decided to contact a professional. When the investigator arrived, he went to where the spirit was most active and sprinkled talc powder all over the floor there. To everyone's shock the next day, the name Julie had been scrawled into the powder on the floor. At that point, the family decided the only thing to do was to reach out to a Catholic priest for an exorcism. The priest eventually managed to banish Frank, but not before he possessed poor Julie for several hours. Moral of the story? Don't mess with Ouija boards. Starting us off at number 10 is Maple Hill Cemetery. Founded in 1822, this cemetery is the oldest and largest burial ground in the state, where roughly 80,000 people have been laid to rest. But with that many souls in one place, it only takes a matter of time before people start noticing something strange happening. While during the day, you may be spared from witnessing a horrifying spirit, it's said at night the tortured souls are unearthed, roaming the grounds in search of answers. Most unsettling is the park on the property, also known as the Dead Playground. Oh gee, that sounds inviting, don't you think? Apparently it's nicknamed that as many young people are buried in the area, and visitors brave enough to see for themselves what goes on claim that at night the trapped souls of the young can be seen playing around the park, while their creepy giggles echo throughout the grounds. But whatever you do, make sure you pay respect to Mary Bibb. If you knock on her mausoleum walls, she will reply with a gentle creak of her rocking chair buried inside. But if you forget to greet her, well, she just might haunt you forever. Coming in at number 9 is Fort Morgan. Said to be one of the most haunted places in all of Alabama, Fort Morgan is rife with ghoulish tales of ghosts and strange occurrences. The most notorious is that of a prisoner who's said to have died here in the early 1900s after he took his own life in the barracks. People say that if you walk past, you can still hear him crying out late at night. But he's not the only one you should fear. There's also a female spirit that wanders the grounds in search of justice after she too lost her life after being dragged into the fort and beaten to death by mysterious attackers who were never caught for the crime. Many believe she is an angry spirit with a vengeance who will torture any man who steps foot on the property. So if I were you, I'd skip this one. Next up at number 8 is Drish House. Once the home of Dr. John R. Marsh, a gambler and a drunk who built the estate in 1835 for his beloved bride Sarah. The couple lived in the home for 32 years until one day John had too much to drink for the last time and drunkenly tumbled over the stairway, falling to his demise. But you might be surprised that it's not his spirit that's trapped here, actually his wife Sarah. While no one knows for sure what keeps her soul trapped on the property, some say she was so traumatized after finding her husband dead in their home and wasn't able to recover. Others believe, however, that she refuses to leave because her family failed to honor her own funeral wishes, and so she remains, causing trouble to anyone who steps foot on the property to this day. While today the manor is used for many celebrations, Sarah remains, tormenting guests of the events, trying to get them to leave. If you're brave enough to visit, try looking up at the 3rd story tower. It says you can catch a glimpse of her up there. Just be careful she doesn't see you looking, or she may just follow you around the property, terrorizing you until you leave. Next up at number 7, the Old Bryce Hospital. There are few places in this world more haunted than an old abandoned mental health facility, and there is no denying that the torment that went on here is a huge reason as to why so many spirits remain haunting its grounds, seeking revenge. Built during the segregation era of America, the building was branded as an insane asylum for those suffering from mental illnesses, when in reality it was pretty much a work camp for able-bodied black people who were admitted under false pretenses and then forced into slave labor, working in the fields around the hospital. Shockingly, the facility remained open until 1977 and only closed due to new desegregation laws. It comes as no surprise that after years of abuse and inhumane living conditions suffered by the so-called patients, that people claim to have had strange experiences while visiting. Those who've dared to visit the abandoned hospital claim the souls are angry, and that as soon as you walk in, you can feel the air shift. Many report hearing strange noises, and some even claim to have seen shadowy figures lurking around every corner. Next up at number 6 is St. James Hotel. For whatever reason, hotels tend to be a pretty big hotspot for paranormal encounters, and the St. James Hotel is definitely a part of that phenomenon. Back in the day it was the first hotel operated by a black congressman, and despite having many years of success, it hit hard times in the late 1800s and was eventually forced to close its doors to the public. Fast forward about 100 years to 1997 and the hotel reopened, but this time something was off about the building. Something just wasn't right. During its century-long time as an abandoned building, it became a horrifying hub for lost souls, and I guess they decided to remain, haunting all those that dare stay the night. Visitors claim seeing full-bodied apparitions sitting at the bar, or witness lights shutting off out of nowhere. But most creepy of all was a recorded visit when a psychic research team was brought in, and they walked the grounds asking if anyone was there, but they never heard a response back. But later on, when they played the tapes, an older man's voice responded saying, "Well, that's a stupid question," making everyone in the room jump. So, what do you say? Are you brave enough to pay the ghosts a visit? Coming in at number 5, Cahaba Ghost Town. It likely comes as no surprise that a ghost town is also home to thousands of unsettling spirits. But few are more terrifying than Cahaba. Once the capital city of Alabama, it was abandoned after the Civil War when terrible flooding led to most of the buildings falling into complete disrepair, and so the citizens who survived were forced to leave for good. Today, nothing remains but the ruins of what used to be, including a church, a few cemeteries, and the Barker Mansion and its slave quarters. And I mean, that is just all the ingredients for a haunted ghost town if I've ever heard of one. Those that have tried to visit the once booming city recount that as soon as you enter the town's borders, cell service gets spotty and unreliable, only to be completely fine as soon as you step even 1 foot off the border of the town. While that alone might not scare visitors away, there are also countless reports of visitors witnessing terrifying apparitions and hearing the voices of the dead crying out at night for revenge. So visit at your own risk, but don't say I didn't warn you. Coming in at number 4 is the Boynton Oak. Of all the things that are usually haunted, like cemeteries, hospitals, churches, the last thing you'd likely expect to need to be afraid of was a tree. But trust me, this is no ordinary tree. The Boynton Oak is said to have grown from the grave of one Mr. Charles Boynton. As the legend goes, back in 1835, Charles was accused of friend Nathaniel Frost. Charles disputed the accusation and never once wavered from his alleged innocence. Still, he was found guilty for the crime and sentenced to execution as payback. But right before he was executed, he declared in front of everyone that a tree would spring forth from his grave as a proof of his innocence, and then they would all see that they had caught the wrong man. And shockingly, this is exactly what happened. Many claim that Charles's spirit haunts the tree above his grave, often freaking out those who come to visit. Even spookier is that some claim to have even seen him sitting under the tree waiting. But just who is he waiting for? No one knows exactly. Coming in at number 3 is Sloss Furnaces. Once built as a means to access iron ore, coal, and limestone, the Sloss Furnaces were far from a safe place to work. It's believed over the years at least 47 men lost their lives working at the furnaces due to the incredibly dangerous work conditions. But the most talked about is that of James Slag Wormwood, a former foreman of the furnaces known for being cruel to his employees and who died after slipping and falling into a pool of molten iron ore. Although there is rumor he may have been pushed by his workers, forced to the brink after his unending abuse. Still, after Wormwood's death, strange things started happening more and more frequently. Workers were seeing strange things, hearing strange noises, and started to feel like they were going crazy. Employees were being found injured or seen tripping and falling out of nowhere. Each of them recounted that an angry man covered in burns had tried to push them after screaming at them to get back to work. Then in 1971, a watchman encountered what he described as a half-man, half-demon who tried to push him up the stairs. After the watchman refused the spirit's advance, he was badly beaten by the entity until he fell unconscious. Later, while being examined, he was found to be covered in severe burns where he says he was beaten. So unless you're looking to be beaten up by an angry spirit and covered in burns from the blows, I might suggest a different place for your visit. Coming in at number 2 is Bear Creek Swamp. Even at the best of times, swamps give off spooky and creepy vibes, and this one might just be the worst of them all. Legend has it that many years ago, a woman's son went missing. Scared, the mother went looking for him in the nearby swamp, hoping that he had simply run away from home. But no matter how long she looked, she could never find him. It said she died in the swamp looking for him, and if you walk into the swamp today and and say, "We have your baby," 3 times, she will come out of nowhere and attack you until you leave for good. And don't even try to come back after she's banished you. You might not be so lucky the second time around. And last up today in our number 1 spot is Sweetwater Mansion. Designed by war vet General John Brahan, this mansion was named after the nearby creek and first occupied by the general's son-in-law, Robert Patton. Under Patton's jurisdiction, the basement of the mansion served as a Civil War hospital and a county jail. And if that wasn't enough, it's said that at one point someone who lived in the mansion practiced dark magic, which thinned the veil between worlds. This would make sense considering just how many people have witnessed earth-shattering apparitions that sent them running for the hills. Most notably is the casket that contains a body of a Confederate soldier in one of the downstairs rooms that will suddenly disappear right in front of your eyes. It's believed that the casket is haunted by the spirit of original owner Robert Patton, whose funeral was held at the home and who was documented having an open casket ceremony. But that's not even the scariest part. There's a room on the property that routinely locks female visitors inside. In fact, it happens so frequently that caretakers of the property have avoided entering it at all costs. And if a self-locking door and a terrifying soldier ghost don't turn you off of the property, there is also a secret room on the property with no door. The only way to enter is by a small window, and it's believed that anyone who goes in will never escape. So if I were you, I'd skip this one.
At number 10 we have Salem, Massachusetts, USA. A town revered by the occult and has a dark enough history to make any horror fan squeal with glee. Salem, Massachusetts was the home of the 1692 Salem witch trials. This is where a massive witch hunt led to the hanging of 19 people who were falsely accused of using witchcraft. There are several spots around the town that give off an extremely creepy vibe and have reported hauntings, but the most notorious place is the former home of Sheriff George Corwin. He was the man responsible for spearheading the hunting and capturing of these witches. Not only that, but the people that were captured, he would take them into his basement and then he would torture these people until they confessed to their crimes. Now his ghost and the ghosts of several other people who were tortured by him haunt the Joshua Ward House, which is the building that sits on the land that the sheriff's house used to be on. At number 9 we have the Fairmont Hotel in Banff, Canada. If you have never been to Banff, it is one of the most beautiful places in the whole world. There's amazing skiing in the winter, and in the summer it turns into a lush green wonderland. If you were a ghost, this would be a paradise to haunt. The Fairmont sits on top of a mountain that looks so regal it could double as the Grand Budapest Hotel. It was built in 1888 and it was the center point to increase tourism in the area, and it worked. But like any old building, this place has adopted some guests that refuse to check out. There are 2 ghosts that are responsible for the majority of the ghost sightings, one being that of an old bellhop. He was the employee of the hotel back in the 70s, and after he kicked the bucket, he decided that retirement wasn't for him. His ghost has been seen throughout the hotel helping people to this day. Very few people get to do what they love. Why let a little thing like death stop you from sticking to your passion? Another ghost is that of the bride dressed all in white. The story goes that she tripped down a staircase on the day of her wedding and met a grim ending. That is a huge bummer. You're about to make it to the altar and you lose your footing. Oh, that sucks. At number 8 we have the Chinoi Church in Beijing, China. An old mysterious building that sits in Beijing, China. There are several elements to this building that make it an intriguing place for anyone interested in the supernatural. First, no one knows who built the building or who commissioned the building to be built, almost as if an outside force created the building, like the devil came to town and was like, yeah, let's build a church. Also, on the front door of the building there is a note that makes it very clear that there are no ghosts inside, which is super sus. Like where I live, there's no note about ghosts because it's just a given. We know there's no ghosts. This place uses the used car salesman approach to convincing people. Yeah, that rickety noise in the back? Oh, that's just something the car makes. It's an added feature. The residence is haunted by the ghost of a young woman who killed herself by hanging during the communist war in China. Some say she did this because her husband was killed at war, and others say she was trying to avoid capture. At number 7 we have the Shanghai Tunnels in Portland, USA. A Shanghai tunnel sounds like a place where you go to bet on horse racing and eat the best fried rice you've ever had in your life. But it actually used to be the epicenter for human trafficking in the United States. Located in Portland, Oregon, the tunnels are now run down and unused. Back in the 19th century, people walking through these tunnels would often be kidnapped, and then sold overseas into slave labor. Some bars above these tunnels had trap doors in them, which they would use to take drunk people, slip them down into the tunnels where they would never be seen again. A lot of people died in these tunnels before they were sold off into slavery. Now it's said that their angry ghosts walk the halls. Screaming, banging, and even weeping can be heard when you pass through these tunnels. At number 6 we have La Château de Brisac, France. We are heading all over the world with this list, and now we're heading to a place that has a long, rich history, France. It makes sense to waltz right into a castle. Besides being one of the most glorious buildings in all of France, an exciting reason to visit this place is the spectral tourist attraction. Back during the reign of King Charles VII, he was married to a beautiful woman who he unfortunately found out was cheating on him. He wasn't too happy with this, so he divorced her, and that was that. I'm just kidding. It was the 1400s. He also had her killed for insulting his honor. That's how they did things back then. When her life ended, she was wearing a green dress. Now it's said you can see the ghost of a woman in a green dress walking the halls, moaning for her lost love. At number 5 we have Morgan House, Kalimpong, India. The estate formerly owned by the Morgans has a rather dark past. The house was lived in by Baron George Morgan and his wife back in the 1930s. Apparently Mr. Morgan would spend a lot of his free time torturing his wife. With them being in India and his wife having nowhere to go, she eventually fell into a depression. Not long after that, she died. The two never had any kids, and after Mr. Morgan died, the Indian government took control of the property. It has now been spruced up into a nice hotel, but the terrors of this building's past haven't been washed away. Mrs. Morgan is free from her husband and has no interest in leaving her home. Many patrons of the hotel say they have heard her high heels walking along the wooden floors. At number 4 we have Casa Loma, Toronto, Canada. The most famously haunted place in all of Toronto. It's literally a massive castle that is a 10-minute drive from the world famous CN Tower. It's strange having a massive stone castle built in the early 20th century so close to the downtown core, but that's probably why it's so haunted. All the ghosts want to gather there because it feels like home. One of the most haunted areas of the castle are the secret underground tunnels which connect different sections of the property. There have been reports of a ghostly miner who might have died digging the tunnels and a lady in a white dress. Also, the castle's former owner, Lady Mary Pellet, has been seen all throughout the building. Some people say they've tried to take a picture of her when she's walking through, and she will use her ghostly powers to turn off your camera. Sounds like she's not very photogenic. If you want to give yourself an extra fright, you should come check out the castle in October when they turn the whole thing into a massive haunted house. I've been, it's a great time. At number 3 we have the Hill of Crosses in Lithuania. The look of this place will make you say, oh yeah, there are for sure some ghosts in here. This hill has been the site of rebellion, respect, and remembering the dead for the past 500 years. People have come here to place crosses as a way to pay good fortune to those who died fighting for the freedom of Lithuania. This practice has made it a safe haven for spirits to walk through, and there have been reports of seances performed there trying to contact these dead heroes. There are currently over 100,000 crosses piled up on this hill. Back in the Soviet reign, they tried to destroy this holy landmark 3 times. Three times. But the Lithuanian people stood strong and came back to rebuild it every time. That's a pretty awesome story of solidarity. I know why ghosts want to hang out here. They're like, I know my home will be safe forever. At number 2 we have Cemetery number 1 in New Orleans, USA. This place has been nicknamed the Haunted City because it is literally filled with so many graves that you could fill a small theater. There are over 700 graves at this site. You pack that many people into one spot and you are guaranteed some strange spirits walking around. On Halloween, it must be like a massive party in there. It would be a giant ghost rave with the coolest people from the last 200 years. The grave that gets the most attention is that of former voodoo priestess Marie Laveau. It's said she had the power to influence spirits, and now even in death her ghost can gain strength from the graveyard and get the phantoms to do her bidding. I mean, that's a good skill to have after you're dead. You're like, oh, you guys, you work for me. That's how this is gonna work. And for the number 1 spot we have the Rose Hall in Montego Bay, Jamaica. A beautiful mansion that used to be the home of the Palmers back in the 19th century. The two were a loving couple, or that's what the public thought. Mr. Palmer died one day of suspicious causes, but foul play was inconclusive. Annie Palmer took control of the property, and people weren't too suspicious until her 2 following husbands and her parents died, all without warning. Now things are getting a little suspicious. The urban legend of Annie Palmer is that she was a witch and she would use dark magic to kill her victims. It's said said that her evil spirit still inhabits the Rose Hall. A witch ghost sounds pretty serious, especially one that has killed people. That's not something you want to disturb for your own entertainment, right? Well, you totally can. You can take tours of the building which highlight all the legends surrounding the Witch of the Rose Hall. And if you really want to bring some bad mojo into your life, you can take part in a seance to communicate with the spirit of Annie Palmer. I think the ghost of a murderous witch isn't something I would want to hang out with.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Fairmont Banff Spring Hotel. This Canadian hotel is absolutely legendary, but despite the spooky tales, tourism remains as high as ever. This hotel was built in 1888 in order to encourage tourists and to sell train tickets, and while it certainly did just that, this chateau-style hotel was only the icing on the cake to a trip to the gorgeous Rocky Mountains and all that waits in the Banff National Park. Through the years though, several guests have had some haunting stories to tell, which included reports of ghost sightings. These ghosts are thought to reside in the hotel, and they include a bride who allegedly fell down the stone staircase during her wedding, which led to her untimely departure, or the legend of Sam the Bellman. This legend has it that Sam worked at the hotel until 1975, and before leaving, he claimed that he would come back to haunt the hotel. It is said that his spirit can be seen in the hotel, helping people with their bags. In our number 9 spot today, we have Zunantunich. This location sits deep in the jungles of Belize, located less than a mile from the border of Guatemala. It has an unbelievably rich history, as it is an ancient Maya ruin that has been abandoned for the last 1,000 years. In 1890, this site had its modern discovery, and since then it has been an important site for archaeology, an amazing tourist attraction, but also it is said to be a hotspot for the paranormal. It is said that the site is haunted by a female ghost. She has black hair and glowing red eyes. Referred to as the Stone Lady, it is said that she was first spotted by one of the first research teams in the area in 1893, and since then she has been frequently seen by the tallest building complex called El Castillo. No one exactly knows the story behind the Stone Lady considering the history of this site, but many believe she may have been a part of a ritual sacrifice, which was a tradition and spiritual practice done by the ancient Maya civilization. In our number 8 spot today, we have Burg Eltz. This German castle dates back to 1157, so it's no surprise that there are many myths and legends surrounding it. The most common tale is that of a young countess named Agnes. Agnes was betrothed or promised to another noble, but after meeting him, she called off their future wedding. Apparently this guy was the worst, and also even if he wasn't, no one could really blame her for calling off a wedding she didn't want to have. But of course, things quickly went awry. This noble guy was mad that she had rejected him, so the scorned lover laid siege to the castle. Agnes fought to defend her home, but she passed away during the battle. That is the story behind why her spirit is said to haunt the Burg Eltz castle. Many say the strongest presence is felt in her former bedroom. It is said that her spirit is quite mournful, and apparently her battle armor and axe remain on display as well. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Eden Brown Estate. This estate is located in Nevis, which is the smaller of the two islands that comprise the nation of St. Kitts and Nevis in the Caribbean. It is said that despite having just as much to offer, Nevis is often overshadowed by St. Kitts. That is, until people hear of this ghostly haunting. Eden Brown Estate is a former plantation that now lies in ruin. The estate was once owned by a businessman who was going to give the property to his daughter as a wedding present. Legend goes that on the wedding day there was a very mysterious duel between the groom and his best man that ended up leaving both of the men dead. Because of this tragic happening on what should have been her wedding day, the businessman's daughter remained unmarried and alone for the rest of her life, which meant that when she passed, there was no one to leave the estate to. Now visitors of the estate report seeing the spirit of a reclusive woman as she roams about the grounds. Aside from this story, who knows what other kind of horrors and absolute tragedies that this place has seen. In our number 6 spot today, we have Bangar Fort. Bangar Fort is located in India, just 100 miles southwest of Delhi. This place is pretty much completely abandoned, as it is said to have had a curse placed on it. Apparently many years ago, a sorcerer tried to woo a local princess, in which she rejected him. He got so upset that he decided that cursing this town was his only course of action. I just have to mention that none of these are a normal reaction to being rejected, and calling it an overreaction would honestly be an understatement. This fort now is closed to visitors after sundown because of all the spooky happenings that go on here. This fort is extremely beautiful, so it's no wonder the paranormal doesn't keep people out. People have reported having extremely strong feelings of an otherworldly presence, and even some have reported hearing voices that are seemingly coming from nowhere. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Whaley House. The Whaley House is located in San Diego and it was built in 1857. The site that this family house was built on was actually the location of San Diego's first public gallows, so as you can imagine, that's a pretty good backstory for a haunted site. Right after moving in, Thomas Whaley reported that he could hear the footsteps of Yankee Jim Robinson, who had been hanged at the gallows just 4 short years before the house was built. After moving in, the Whaley family began to experience a bunch of family tragedies, many of which actually happened inside of the house. The Whaley house is now a museum, and apparently the family members continue to haunt the site. These paranormal occurrences are apparently often accompanied by the smells of cigar smoke and heavy perfumes. In our number 4 spot today, we have Obvodny Canal. Obvodny Canal is located in St. Petersburg, Russia, and this whole thing just really creeps me out. This man-made canal was built in the late 18th century, and ever since then there has been extremely strange occurrences at this location. Construction workers would complain of headaches. They would also sometimes even have random outbursts of violent behavior that was uncharacteristic of them, but the craziest, most unsettling part is what has given this location full cursed status. Many of these people have attempted to take their own lives. Sadly, most of the attempts were successful, but the few people who have been saved have explained that they have no idea why they did it. They say that they didn't really have intentions beforehand, and some have even said that they felt some sort of invisible force pulling them into the water. Apparently there are some sinister souls that live beneath the surface of the water, and there have even been reports of seeing a lady in white in the water before she suddenly disappears. Long story short, remind me to just never ever go here. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Eastern State Penitentiary. The Eastern State Penitentiary is located in Philadelphia, and of course it used to be a prison, but it is now an abandoned and extremely haunted house. This prison used to house some pretty big profile prisoners such as Al Capone and Willie Sutton, but it was different from the American prisons we are used to now. This is because this prison was entirely separate incarceration. The inmates would live, sleep, eat, and everything else alone. When they were removed from their cells, they would have hoods placed over their heads as well. Considering all we now know about how detrimental isolation is, this of course must have taken an immense toll on the prisoners. Beside this, there were also some pretty gruesome and horrible punishments in this prison, such as having prisoners' tongues chained to their wrists. I'm honestly not even sure how you would do that, but apparently it was a thing. This prison now sees thousands of voluntary visitors every year, and there have been plenty of reports of some creepy paranormal happenings. These reports include seeing shadowy figures, hearing creepy laughter that doesn't belong to anyone living, and hearing footsteps throughout the prison. I feel like considering all that went on when this prison was active, it truly does make sense that this building would be a haunted one. In our number 2 spot today, we have Raynham Hall. Raynham Hall is located in England and was built around 1620, and it is a large building on 7,000 acres, which is obviously quite impressive. The tale that follows this haunted building is that of Lady Dorothy Dolly Townsend and her husband Viscount Turnip Townsend. I can't believe a couple with the nicknames Dolly and Turnip have an evil history, but unfortunately, they do. The story goes that Turnip kept Dolly locked up in the house, which is obviously just terrible and very cruel. After her passing, it's no wonder she decided to stick around and haunt the house. Apparently, there was a photo taken of her ghost in 1930, and it is said that no one has ever been able to prove it was a fake, so all you photo experts out there, take a look and let me know what you think. A lot of the places on this list now serve as haunted houses, but apparently this one is still lived in by the Raynham family. Hence the name. In our number 1 spot today, we have Forsyth Park. One thing I didn't know is that apparently the entire city of Savannah, Georgia is a pretty haunted place due to the creepy tunnels that are located underneath the city. But one of the most notable, highly haunted places within the city is Forsyth Park. Apparently there used to be a hospital across the street, and there would be autopsies performed in the tunnels below the park. I personally feel like autopsies are already creepy enough, so I'm not sure if conducting them in an underground tunnel was exceptionally necessary, but hey, I can't change the past. Because of this scary practice, the park has seen a lot of paranormal activity since these days, and it usually is the sort of place where 1 second you'll see a strange figure, but as soon as you blink or look away, it disappears just as quickly as it suddenly appeared.
Starting us off at number 10, the Toyoma Park. Here in the heart of Tokyo lies one of the most haunted places in Japan. While in the day the park is a lively spot filled with picnics and games, at night it becomes a whole different place. As the story goes, during World War II, this area was used as a dumping ground for many prisoners of war, and their bodies remain buried deep across the park. At night, it's said to become haunted as the spirits rise and terrorize any who enter. Those who have dared hear terrifying shrills only to find no one around them, and many have reported seeing hitodoma, a fiery ball of light that appears when a person's soul has been separated from its body. And it's not all myth either. Around 20 years ago, hundreds of bones were unearthed from the park's grounds, and even to this day, fragments of victims are slowly being brought to the surface. Next up at number 9, Sunshine 60. Before it was one of Tokyo's tallest skyscrapers, the land where the Sunshine 60 sits was occupied by a terrifying prison. Sugamo Prison, as it was known, held anarchists, communists, and prisoners of war during the American occupation of Japan, and its infamy comes from the 7 war criminals, one of which was a former prime minister, who were executed on the site. After the prison closed, the public was disturbed to find out they planned on building an entertainment complex on the land, but still the development continued as planned. It's believed the 7 men haunt the building, and over the years there have been countless paranormal sightings of strange apparitions and noises when no one was around. Most disturbing of all, it's said that at night, strange fireballs can be seen floating around the building, terrifying any who happen to be near. Next up at number 8, Oya Shrine. As the legend goes, there was once a woman named Yotsuya who married a masterless samurai. One day she receives a cream that she suspects to be a gift from her husband, but after she uses it, she realizes it was poisonous. Yotsuya, seeing how the cream has disfigured her face, becomes hysterical and accidentally takes her own life while running with a sword. Yotsuya then returns as a revengeful ghost to avenge her death and terrorize her husband for what he did to her. The story was the basis for Yotsuya Kaiden, one of Japan's most infamous ghost stories, and over the years, many strange and inexplicable accidents have occurred at the site. Even today, casts that put on productions of the story go to get permission from the woman's grave so as not to be haunted by her for the rest of eternity. Next up at number 7, Zoshigaya Cemetery. While many places seem to just get spooky after the sun goes down, the Zoshigaya Cemetery is feared at all hours of the day. Those who have dared to visit the site claim to have witnessed strange faces and white hands appearing out of the trees, and 3 people have actually been known to take their own life while on the grounds. Their spirits are thought to haunt the grounds along with many other souls buried deep. As with many other haunted sites, you can hear strange noises if you dare to enter, but the most disturbing occurrence is from several reports of people experiencing temporary paralysis while strolling through the cemetery. Many that have dared to visit once have never returned, in fear that something even worse could happen if they step foot on the property again. Coming in at number 6, the Doryodo Temple. After the tragic killing of an 81-year-old woman in 1963, the Doryodo Temple was thought to be cursed and would never be the same again. It closed after the incident, and people immediately kept away from it, fearing the woman would haunt the temple and terrorize those who visited. Then, later in 1973, the body of a missing college student was found there, and it was later discovered her professor, who she was having an affair with, took her life, then set fire to the temple temple in an attempt to hide the evidence, leaving behind only demolished remains at the site. The name Doriodo roughly means end of the road temple, and over the years of incidents, locals have interpreted it to mean that this is the last place you'll be seen alive. So enter if you dare, you might still hear the screams of those whose last days were at this very spot. Coming in at number 5, Ireto. Back in 1923, Ireto was the place where many took refuge during the Great Kanto earthquake. Sadly, as the time of the earthquake was when many were cooking in their homes, huge fires broke out all across the city and not many survived. The site was used as a makeshift crematorium where an estimated 38,000 body remains lay, and then, after World War II, a memorial hall was constructed as a place to bury victims from the war. Riddled with ghosts from the tragic earthquake and the war, it's no wonder the hall is believed to be haunted by many of the locals. People walking nearby have reported hearing strange and uncanny noises, and even apparitions of those presumed to have died here all those years ago. Next up at number 4, the Akasaka Weekly Mansion. Although it is a luxury hotel, Akasaka Mansion is also one of the most horrifying places to spend your night. Patrons have reported countless paranormal activities like strange white mists suddenly appearing from the vents and being grabbed while in bed in the middle of the night. Appliances and lights are known to mysteriously turn on and off independently, but the most terrifying of all is the one account of a woman who said she was actually dragged across the room by a terrifying spirit, and she has the scratch marks along her back to prove it. So unless you are looking to be grabbed in your sleep by a terrifying demon and dragged around the floors of your hotel, I think it's best to stay away from the Akasaka Mansion and book elsewhere. Next up at number 3, the Masakado's grave. While it's not uncommon to assume a grave could be haunted, this one is especially disturbing. Masakado's grave is the resting place of an ancient angry samurai rebel. As the legend goes, he was decapitated and his head was left on display at a riverbank. For months, its eyes remained open and its teeth grinding, showing no sign of decomposition. Those who passed the head would claim to hear it screeching or yelling, calling out for whoever did this to them to show themselves. Then mysteriously, one day the head disappeared from the riverbank and made its way from Kyoto all the way to Tokyo, where it supposedly rests to this day. It has long been believed that anyone who disturbs the gravesite will be cursed for all eternity and risks serious injury or even death. In the past, people have tested the curse and attempted to build on the site, but plans have always cancelled as workers kept mysteriously dying out of nowhere. So what do you think? Are you brave enough to visit the site to see for yourself if the curse is real? Coming in at number 2, the Komine Tunnel. In 1989, a cannibal and killer took the life of a young woman and left her mutilated body near the Komine Tunnel, and ever since, no one dares to return to the area. Locals believe the girl haunts the spot, and frequent reports have been made witnessing the ghost lurking around the tunnel. Some hear noises, some feel a cool chill down their spine, but all that enter feel a strange sensation that they are not alone. The locals were so terrified to visit this spot that the government actually built a new tunnel in 2006 to avoid ever needing to go near it again. One account of a cyclist who accidentally found himself by the tunnel stated he felt something cold and wet grab his ankle, but that nothing was there. Frightened it was the ghost of the girl, he started to run away but could still feel her hands on him, and his leg went completely frozen. To this day, paranormal investigators frequent the haunted tunnel hoping to catch the ghost on camera, but none have been successful. And in our number 1 spot, the Himuro Mansion. Many years ago, this mansion was owned by a very rich family that practiced the occult. Now, as the story goes, a part of their practice was something called the strangling ritual, in which a maiden that had been isolated from birth would be bound at every limb point, and then the ends of those ropes would be attached to 5 oxen, who, when cued, would run and dismember the woman. The ropes would then be soaked in her blood and placed over a portal they believed would keep bad karma away for 50 years. Kind of ironic considering this feels like it would cause their bad karma, but what do I know? Now, as you probably guessed, this particular ceremony did not go as planned, as the chosen maiden had snuck away and met a lover and therefore had not been isolated and was impure and unfit for the ritual. Legend says the lover came to the maiden's rescue during the ritual, and the head of the family decided the solution for all of this was to take the life of all 7 members of his family and then himself. To this day, the mansion is believed to be haunted by the souls of the Himuro family, and visitors that walk past may just hear the screeching voices of a maiden. But be careful, it is said the souls will try to entice visitors to complete their ritual from all those years ago.